Most runners have a fairly complicated relationship with pain. I mean, the sport itself can be downright unpleasant at points. Most of us have something hurt during a training cycle and or a race. Doesn't need to be terrible, doesn't need to feel like your leg's going to fall off, but we just kind of get used to pain. And that doesn't mean it's a good thing, but it means we're pretty intimately aware of what pain feels like. So, when Rick Olderman reached out to me to talk about pain on the podcast, I thought it'd be a great fit. Rick is a sports and orthopedic physical therapist for over 25 years. He's written a series of books about pain and helping with chronic pain. And he and I sat down for about an hour to talk about a whole host of topics, from what is pain, how pain gets started in the body, and how you might repattern movements to get rid of some of the pain you're experiencing. He was also kind enough to demonstrate an assessment on me, and if you have the ability to watch the video version of this, I highly recommend it. If not, no worries. I'm going to include a timestamp if you want to skip listening to that. It's only, 10, 15 minutes. The rest of the conversation will be completely audio friendly. But if you have the ability to watch it, I recommend you do so. Anyway, that's it for the intro. We're going to get on with the interview. Welcome to the Eat Well, Sleep Great, Run Far podcast. My name is Will Frantz, and I'm here to help you go farther, faster, and longer without injuries, gut problems, or giving up your favorite foods. This week on the podcast, we have Rick Olderman. He is a physical therapist and personal trainer and Pilates instructor, and he is also the author of the Fixing You series of books. And his assistant reached out to me a few weeks ago to have on the podcast, and he was kind enough to share with me some of his info, and looks legit, so I'd love to chat with him. And we're going to talk about injuries and how you get rid of pain. So I guess first off, Rick, what's your athletic background? What have you done in the past, and what's your history?
Yeah, athletically, I wrestled in high school, played football, and then I've always lifted weights pretty much all my life. And then probably when I got into my mid 30s or maybe early 40s, a friend of mine came in from a run. I said, "Oh, what are you training for?" He says, "I'm going to run a half marathon." I said, "A half marathon? Are you crazy?"
Yeah,
And I thought, I want to do that. So that's what got me started. I've run a couple marathons. I've trained for more marathons than I've actually run.
Fair.
And just ran a heavy half this past weekend, and
Nice.
just trying to keep it up. And every time I think I want to get into ultra running, that's usually in the first 5 to 10 miles of my run. And then once I hit that 10-mile mark, I say, "Who are you kidding?"
Oh, you mean you don't want to
That's
go out
not
there
going to happen.
like 12 hours at a time? That's not a thing
Yeah,
that appeals to
no.
you? Fair enough.
Well, if I run
Okay.
12 hours at a time, it's still not going to be over 5 miles. So,
Oh, I know how that goes.
yeah,
I'm in training for a 50 currently, and you're speaking to an audience of like trail and ultra runners, so it's gonna
right.
be, yeah, I feel you.
Yeah.
It's a big step, man. So
Yeah.
you write a whole series of books on pain, and there's not a single person listening to this who hasn't experienced pain, not just because we're human, but also because like we actively seek it out in this sport. What is pain?
Well, pain is a sign that something is wrong in your body right now.
Okay.
And that whatever set that up could have happened, last week or 20 years ago. So the good news is, though, that because it's a sign that something is wrong in your body right now, if you fix it now, that pain can go away, even if it's been around for 20 years.
Okay. I love that answer. So what is that distinction, or like how do you figure out how much you go about figuring out a pain that's been here for 20 years versus something that's recent, and like what might the stimulus be if those are different?
Well, you know what? It doesn't matter to me when I try and figure out pain, because the way I work, and we can talk about what that is, but I've broken the body down into two basic movement systems. One is anything low back pain all the way down to the foot is one of those systems of movement. And then the other system is any pain from the shoulders, arms and head. That's another system of movement. And I look at everything from the pelvis all on up to the head. So there's crossover, of course, but
Sure.
that way I see everything that's wrong at once. And so it doesn't matter whether it's an acute injury, and it's funny, someone just asked me this question, what's the difference between acute injury and chronic injury in terms of medicine? I feel like we address acute injuries much more or less seriously than chronic injuries, because in medicine, I think that we rely on the body's innate ability to heal, to carry that person through that injury. Let's just rest and ice and we'll massage this and it's going to go away and you're going to feel fine. And we think that then when that acute pain is gone, the injury is gone. But it could be a chronic issue that's contributing to that acute injury. And if you don't address that acute injury more seriously, it could become a chronic issue later in life. So
Sure.
I think that a lot of us are getting this wrong in medicine.
I can see that. So like what might that look like? Say you have an acute issue that is coming from a chronic issue.
Yeah.
How should we be looking at that differently?
Yeah. So let's take one common to runners, knee pain. All right.
Yeah.
So I've got a little skeleton. I'm going to demonstrate some things on.
That'd be great.
All right. So the knee, there's precious little in the knee that actually contributes to the knee function. Everything that's coming from either the hip or the foot.
Sure.
And so there is one small muscle in the knee that controls the knee joint. We'll get to that in just a second. But there's all sorts of things that control the knee, such as one of the big things I look at is the shape of the thigh bone. So I don't know if you've heard of femoral retroversion or femoral anteversion, but basically all of our thigh bones, which is a long straight bone in the body, they're not built the same. Men typically tend towards having something called femoral retroversion, which is an external rotation or an outward rotation of the thigh bone, even though it's sitting correctly in the hip socket.
Okay.
A twist is happening. And females are typically oriented more towards an anteversion, which is an inward rotation of the thigh bone. Okay.
Absolutely. So is this related to your Q angle? Sorry to interrupt you.
It can, especially an anteverted femur will contribute more to a Q angle.
Got it.
Right? Which is the angle between the ankle, knee, and the pelvis. Mm-hmm. Right?
Yeah.
So, and a larger Q angle in older research is blamed for things like ACL tears and meniscal things and, MCL strains and so forth. So, anyway, so the shape of the thigh bone, the problem is that, a lot of training systems don't take in the shape of the thigh bone into account when we're training.
Yeah.
For instance, I was just working with an NFL player, and he had hip and foot pain, and he had one retroverted femur. And so his pain started when he was in college. I didn't find this out until this was 9 years later. And so his problem started in college when he started working with the trainers in college. And it's because all offensive linemen go through the same training, right?
Yep.
And so there's no understanding of femoral anteversion or retroversion. You're going to point your feet forward because that's the way it's done, Well, I'm sorry, if you've got a retroverted femur, that's not going to work. It's going to create all sorts of problems. And that's what happened with him. He had one. And then also the stance on the line.
Sure.
It was set up in a way for someone without retroverted femurs. So once we made the small change to his foot position, this is during practice and live games, within 3 days, his pain was basically gone that he had for 9 years. And so what that does is, if you have, and I'll just go into more detail, if you have a retroverted femur and it's rotated out, but you have this socialized idea that you should be standing with your feet pointed forward, straight ahead, then what you are creating is a relatively internally rotated lower body system. internal rotation at the knee and at the hip joint and even at the foot often creates pain.
Sure.
All right. So for someone with a retroverted femur, the simple solution is to just let the feet rotate out a little bit, like usually 2 to 5 degrees solves the problem. That takes tremendous stress off of these joints. But additionally, what happens is by virtue, and those of you who think that you might have retroverted femur, just try standing with your feet pointed straight ahead. All right, just for 10 seconds. Now turn your feet out 5 or 10 degrees and feel the difference. All right. And if you don't feel the difference, now rotate your feet back straight ahead again. And you'll feel the tension in your system increase because of that pointing the feet forward. So that is happening all day long whenever you're standing and walking and when you're running.
Yep.
So you have this unnecessarily increased tension in your system, and tension is a recipe for chronic pain, tendonitis, tendinosis, all that kind of stuff, right?
Sure.
If you're developing all this chronic tension in your system, then that's where a lot of knee pain will be coming from.
Sure.
Too. All right. In a nutshell, without getting too specific.
Yeah, no, that makes a ton of sense. I kind of figured this out a bit ago when I was doing like heavy back squats. If I turn my feet out like 10 degrees, like you said, it fixes the problem, right? Whereas before that, it's causing issues.
So let me ask you this, Will. Why weren't your feet turned out originally?
Oh, they were originally, and then
what happened?
You're supposed to do it forward,
right?
Trainer, and then I stopped doing it because another trainer told me, "No, man, it's silly. Don't do that."
Yeah. When I first started personal training, I worked at this kind of prestigious health club, and I was starting to do some lunges with someone, and one of the trainers came up and said, "You can't do that." I said, "Well, what's going on?" And they said, "The knee is moving over the toe. You can't do that." I said, "I don't understand. Why not?" And she's just like, "You're just not supposed to do that." I said, "But that's how the ankle's built to happen."
And, you go upstairs, man.
How's this person going to sit in a chair if their ankle knee can't? And so I said, if you show me the research, I'll be happy to stop. But that never happened. And that's just there's a lot of these myths that are floating around in training, yoga, Pilates, physical therapy, medicine in general. Things like your feet have to be pointed forward and your knees can't pass over the toes, and all sorts of things that end up getting us into trouble.
Well, for sure. And I feel like what really kind of drew me to your stuff in your books was the looking at past injuries and past relations and how they make connections, right? Like, I have a long injury history for a whole bunch of reasons, mostly being an idiot 20-year-old male. And
is there any other kind? Well,
not that I've personally met, man.
Me neither.
Oh God. So yeah, one of those things. And I have always realized, because my dad's a PT, right? Like I'm a little privileged on that front, that there's this relevance to my past injuries that cause current pain. And I know a lot of people don't think about that. They'll do like an intake on somebody and ask them about any injury history. And like, no, nothing. And you're like, no, I'm talking like 20 years. And then they'll give you, 8 things that have gone wrong. And I feel like that is, you can tell me, but I feel like that seems to lead to a ton of movement imbalances over the years.
Absolutely. You're absolutely right. Yeah. And it's really funny. Some people don't think of things as injuries. And I had a woman with chronic migraines. It ended up, I believe, coming from her shoulders. I sent her in for MRI. She said she had no shoulder pain, no history of any shoulder issues. She came back and she had 2 full thickness rotator cuff tears.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
That's fascinating.
And she didn't know it. And her doctor was just, how in the world did you figure that out? I said, well, I didn't figure out that she had rotator cuff tears. You just did. But I knew something was wrong with her shoulders. She had spent the last 15 years compensating so astutely for this. And what had happened is that it ended up generating neck pain and headaches, chronic headaches for her. So this was the issue. Once she got those shoulders repaired, no more migraines.
Sure. So when we come to some of this compensation stuff, how might we go about diagnosing it? Or how much you first, because that's probably a little easier for you to talk about. And then how might we do that without spending a fortune on medical care?
Yeah. So, it's a good question. I don't want to give you a standard PT answer, but I mean,
I mean, you can.
I just have to look at the body to understand,
Yeah, I get
So
that.
I think the first step though would be open to the idea that, oh, maybe those old ankle sprains that I had when I was in high school and they were on the same side as my knee pain now. Maybe there is a connection there.
Yeah.
And, or maybe that's why my back hurts, on that side, or maybe that's why I have SI joint pain, all sorts of things. So these old injuries, just being aware that there could be a connection will send you down the road to solve that connection. So many people are unaware and this is how we're trained in not only, as lay people, but in medicine too. We're trained to think that knee pain is a problem with the knee. Back pain is a problem with the back. No, it's all part of the same system. It's a system of problems. The knee is the weak link in that system, or the back is in that particular case. So being open to thinking of anything in your lower body system that might have gone wrong in the past is likely contributing to your current pain now. And if you're open to that, you'll be open to casting a bigger net to solve these things.
I get that. That makes a ton of sense. So would you mind, you're welcome to say no, diagnosing a little bit of my hip issue at the moment?
I'd be happy to.
Might look like.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. Let me put away my skeleton here.
That sounds great. Cool.
All right. So tell me about your hip. What's going on?
When I run more than about an hour and a half, I get this pain here on my hip, right? Feels like where the insertion of the femur goes into pelvis. And it's not terrible. It's not great. And I've noticed in the past when I kind of come out and sweep in that rotation, it will click. It's been doing that for a very long time. It has never caused any pain. But now that I'm running more, it's starting to get twingy. And a couple weeks ago, if you want the whole the short version of the whole injury history,
it all matters.
I busted my left MCL dancing at a wedding. Not terribly, but it's not great. I have bursitis in my right knee from an old Frisbee injury, and then I obliterated my left ankle in the first year of college.
Okay, that's it.
That's all that's in my current memory. Those are the big ones.
All right. So, do you mind taking off your shirt so I can take a look at it? Yeah. Take off your shirt and turn around.
Okay. Do you want it completely off or pulled up?
Completely off.
Okay. Hold up.
Back to me. And you're pointing at your right hip, correct?
Yeah, that'd be my
right. So I can see already that you have what I call a side bending problem on your right side. So your right pelvis is elevated, and I'm going to guess that your right rib cage is also depressed.
Probably.
All right.
My left shoulder is separated too.
Yeah, you have something going on with your left shoulder too, but I'm going to stay focused on your right hip.
Okay.
So I've seen that. Now, you can put your shirt back on if you like.
Cheers.
So we have talked briefly about femoral retroversion or anteversion. Have you ever had this tested for yourself?
No, the retroversion fits though, because of all the patterning that we've talked about in the past.
I'd like to see the degree of retroversion that you might have. So can you angle your camera down? Because I'm going to have you lying on the floor on your stomach.
Sure.
With your head faced away from us.
Let's see how we can maybe make this work. Sure. All right. Stomach facing this way.
On your stomach, yeah. Head faced away. Scoot away from your bed just a little bit there, Will. Okay, that's good. Okay, bend both of your knees. And now allow both of your feet to fall to the outside naturally. Don't force them. Just not down to the floor, but to the outside. All right. So did you notice that you separated your knees?
Yeah.
So bring those knees back together again. All right. Bend the knees and now let the feet. So those of you watching this on video, you can see that his right foot is out further than his left foot.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you feel that too, Will?
Yep.
Okay. So does that feel painful at all to do?
No.
Okay. So now straighten your left foot down to the ground. and let your right foot fall across your left knee, wherever is comfortable. Don't force it. Okay. And now straighten your right foot down to the ground. Bend your left knee and let your left foot fall across your right knee. Can you see the difference between the two?
Yeah, I feel it.
What's the difference in your opinion?
My left leg is not touching my right leg at the moment,
Mm-hmm.
whereas my right leg would. And
Yeah,
then,
do it on the right side one more time. Yeah, but look what your pelvis is doing. Yeah, exactly. So if you didn't hike, if your pelvis moved the same as your left, your right leg wouldn't go down nearly as far as the left.
Yep.
Does that make sense?
Correct.
Okay, so you can go ahead and stand up. All right, so what that's telling us, so the first angle that we looked at was the amount of internal rotation you have in both of your legs. All right, you have more internal rotation in your right thigh than you do in your left.
Yep.
Fairly significantly.
Yep.
And then the second angle that we looked at was the degree of external rotation you have in both of your legs. The left leg has more external rotation than the right leg does.
Yep.
So it's the left leg that has more femoral retroversion, I would guess, without actually measuring the degree.
You're
just
right.
looking at that gross. Your left foot needs to point out more than your right. So knowing that your pain is on your right side and you've had knee bursitis, I'm beginning to, and you're an endurance athlete, I'm beginning to wonder if this is a compensation issue.
Me too.
So now let's just check something real quick. Put your hands on your butt, and I want you to put your fingers in the center of your butt cheek. So they're right in the middle, thickest part of your butt, right? Not down where your hamstring is, but way up in the middle of the meat. And I want you to pinch your butt cheeks together. And there's your maximum butt contraction. Folks, you can try this at home too. All right. So you got that? There's your maximum. Okay, now relax it completely. Okay, now I'm going to ask you to walk around like 10 steps. So you might want to open your door and just walk around, but keep your hands on your butt cheeks and notice whether you feel any of that contraction happening when you're walking.
Yeah, a little bit.
Okay, is it the same on both?
Right's a little looser.
Okay, so now go up on your tippy toes, keeping your hands there, and walk around like that. Do you feel more butt contraction like that than when your heels were down?
No, less.
Less. Okay. And so we found that your right butt was less active than your left butt. Okay. So, and one last thing, Will, let's have you sit on your bed.
Okay.
Feet on the floor. And I just want to see a gross strength thing. I just want to see, lift up your right foot and stand up on your left. And then sit down on your left. And then lift up your left foot and stand up on your right. And down on your right. Do you feel a difference between the two?
Not a whole lot. Right feels less stable. Not weaker, but less stable.
Less stable. It should, if you were going to kick a soccer ball, which foot you would kick it with your right foot?
Yeah.
Okay. So your left leg is your posting leg.
Yep. That's right.
And that's usually in runners, that's the one that usually lands harder when we're running.
Yeah.
Because of that. So let's just tease this out just one more time. Let's have you sit on the bed since you didn't notice the difference. I just want to make sure we're not barking down the wrong tree.
Sure.
Can you do 10 reps? Just, I don't care which foot you hold up first, but just do 10 reps sitting up and down slowly and feel your leg muscles doing the work. Try not to use your trunk. Okay, and then switch legs. Notice the difference between the two legs?
Yeah, so the strength wise, left was fine the entire time. Right, somewhere around rep 8, my knee wanted to cave and throw everything into my VMO.
Okay, all right. Well, now we're getting somewhere, right? Okay, so I'd like you to angle your camera down one more time, and you're in pants, but do you have a pair of shorts that you can change into, or can those pants pull up above your knee?
Yeah, how high above my knee?
Just, maybe an inch or two. I just want to see your knees. All right. And correct me, it's hard to tell from this angle, but
Yeah.
it looks like your right foot is more pronated than your left. Is that correct? Yeah, and I can't see your feet, but is your right foot flatter than your left?
Not notably that I can tell.
Okay. So yeah, just the thing that I noticed right here, right off the bat, is that we identified that your left leg might be more retroverted than your right, yet your feet are pointed at the same angles.
Okay.
All right. So just do me a favor, stand like that again,
Okay. Sounds
and
good.
let your feet point out maybe 2 to 5 degrees.
Okay.
All right, good. And now just stand there for a second. Do you notice how it's easier for you to keep your knees softer when your feet are pointed out like that?
Yeah.
Point them back forward again like they were. You see how your knees lock backwards?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. So,
and I'll tell you, since you can't see it due to the camera angle, my right foot's out like probably, I don't know, 2 to 3 degrees. My left foot's out like 4 to 5.
Yeah.
When that's actually comfortable.
All right. And then the last question I have for you, when you did those single leg stands when you were sitting on the bed, were your feet pointed forward or were they turned out?
Turned out.
Okay. Both of them equally, you think?
No. No, left more by like
that much.
That is
a couple degrees.
Couple degrees.
I'm just curious, Will, if you I don't want to give you a big workout or anything here, but fine. If you did 10 more with your right foot turned out, would your right leg feel stronger in that position?
What do you mean?
So that your right foot angle is the same as the left. If it's externally rotated that 2 or 3 degrees more, that's like the left is, does your right leg feel stronger in that position or not?
It feels weird.
Yeah, it's going to feel weird.
Feels like I'm like yanking my knee backwards with my glute med. But
that's 10.
I'm less wobbly.
That's 10 there. Did that, and in terms of strength, any difference?
Similar strength.
Okay,
but less wobbly.
All right. So so what we found is because you have that side bending problem at the very beginning, it means that this is probably an older problem. All right.
Yeah, I'm sure that's accurate.
Yeah. So the second thing that of note is that your right butt muscle doesn't seem to be firing as well as your left.
Definitely true.
So have you ever heard of something called anterior femoral glide syndrome?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. That I would venture to say that you are more prone. So anterior femoral glide syndrome, folks, for those of you watching or listening, when the hip is in the socket, it should just be pivoting in that socket when you're moving through motion. But in anterior femoral glide syndrome, what's happening is the thigh bone is actually migrating forward in the hip socket. All right. It's kind of like if you've ever had a washing machine that's out of balance, it's careening around. That's kind of what's happening with the thigh bone in the hip socket. All right. So you also mentioned that you had a click in your hip. All right. So anterior femoral glide syndromes also contribute to labral tears because of that uncontrolled careening in the hip socket.
That makes sense.
It also, if you have something called FAI, which is femoral acetabular impingement syndrome, that is a thickening of the socket of the hip joint. And usually that's going to happen on the side where there's an anterior femoral glide syndrome. Yeah. I believe it's in response to the glide act. It's actually abutting against that and causing the bone to become thicker there to protect that area. So, and this also contributes to overall just hip arthritis because things aren't controlled well and things are sliding when they should be pivoting. So I think you probably have something like that going on in that right hip. All right. And especially when you tell me that your right butt doesn't seem to be as contracted, that's the primary controller of the hip bone in the hip socket. And that's not happening when you're walking. So it makes me wonder if that's happening with your running, or maybe it's some percentage less than the left when you're running.
It feels weaker.
Yeah.
I've been trying to figure this out for months. So like this is all like coming like exactly where I thought, just way fucking faster. So yeah.
So the butt muscle is also an external rotator of the thigh bone.
Cool.
All right. Well, we just learned that your thigh bone is slightly more internally rotated than your left one on the right. So
Sure.
you need more external rotation control than you do on your left side.
Sure.
All right. But you don't have that. So that is allowing for uncontrolled internal rotation of the thigh bone in the hip socket.
Cool. Okay.
Okay. Does that
Yeah.
make sense?
Yep.
All right. That also puts the IT band at not an ideal position to work in.
Sure.
So, and then also what that does is it plays down into the foot as well, because then the foot starts to flatten because the thigh bone is rotating in, because the butt isn't firing. The whole system starts collapsing in. This is what, well, we started off with knee pain at the beginning. This is a classic example of what causes a lot of chronic knee pain.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah,
and it can cause, plantar fasciitis pain, heel spur, Morton's neuroma, any kind of knee thing, pathology, any kind of hip issue.
Yep.
It can cause SI joint dysfunction. It can cause sciatic pain, unilateral back pain. So what's important to understand is, and this is one of the things, is that you'll notice that in you, it might cause you hip pain, but in your neighbor, it might cause them knee pain.
Yep.
And in the person down the street, it might cause them SI joint pain.
Yep.
And this is the beauty of understanding the body as a system, because when you see all of these things happening at once, I expect to see these kinds of descriptions of pain. But the solution is the same for all of you.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
So that's the nice way. That's the nice thing about understanding things from a systems standpoint. It makes solving problems a lot simpler. All right. So I believe I'm going to go out on a limb and say that you might have an anterior femoral glide syndrome that's contributing to your labral tear and possible FAI.
Cool.
All right. And that learning to walk with better gluteal activation will likely correct that. But because you're an endurance athlete, I would also give you a specific exercise for gluteal muscles that will get that right glute on track and stronger much faster than just learning how to walk like that. Okay.
Yeah.
And then what I might even do, if I was seeing you personally,
sure,
is tape up the right foot to assist with the external rotation of that lower limb.
Got it.
Because you don't have the muscular control of that yet. So by taping up the arch on the right side, I have a unique way of doing that, that assists that whole lower body system to orient correctly.
Yep.
Does that make sense?
It does. Absolutely. Okay.
So that's kind of it in a nutshell.
Cool.
What I do.
That's great. Yeah. I loved all of that. And that felt like, it felt very familiar, but it's been a while since I've been diagnosed like that. That's cool. Thank you for your time.
Oh, sure.
So if we're looking at seeing,
I'll send you my bill later.
Cheers. Happy to pay it. So if we're looking at your couple things that came from that. One, I'm not in pain most of the time, but I'm clearly dealing with this most of the time.
Mm-hmm.
So clearly we can fix the pain without fixing the cause. How do we go about it? Why or how does that happen?
Well, what do you mean by we can fix the pain without fixing the cause?
Well, my right hip doesn't hurt until I run for about 90 minutes or more.
Oh, okay.
So I'm not in pain most of the time.
Right.
In fact, very rarely.
Doesn't that make sense based on our strength testing?
Yes. So but is this a pretty standard thing where your body just learns to compensate and then you're not in pain? Yeah, that's what I figured.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. Well, I mean, think of the load at the hip joint, the knee joint. I think I read a long time ago that the foot and ankle goes through up to 5 times your body weight on a run. Your knee goes through up to 3 times, and your hip 1 to 2 times your body weight.
Sure.
So you've got this compounding factor with high volume.
Mm-hmm.
And so at some point, it's just got to break down because you don't have the muscular control of anything yet. And you might, it may be that taping that right foot may just put you over the edge and, take this away for you,
sure,
until you at least get that gluteal muscle under control.
Cool. So if we get directions like that or figure out our own stuff from your books or whatever, how do we go about tracking progress in a way that would indicate we're doing well or heading in the right direction?
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, I expect pain to go away very rapidly.
Sure.
Right. So in my clinic, I typically expect a 30 to 50% reduction in pain after my first visit. And so if I'm not getting that, I'm probably barking up the wrong tree. And that's based on the fact that over the years, I've learned that the body responds very rapidly to things that are right. And also, maybe a little more slowly to things that are wrong, because we have so many redundant systems in the body to compensate. But once you reach my door, all those compensations are likely spent.
Yeah.
And so we got to fix all those things. But that's typically what I expect. So if I gave you a program, I would expect you to, what did you say? How many miles did you have to run before you start to?
It's about 90 minutes. I'm a trail runner, so it depends. But
90 minutes. Okay.
Yeah.
So our first goal would be, okay, let's see if we can get you up to 120 minutes.
Sure.
And I would hope to, how often are you running? 90 minutes?
A couple times a week.
Okay.
2.
So I'm hoping a week or two, we would see that up to 120 minutes before fatigue is stepping in, or especially if you tape, it might happen that very day, because now one of the support systems for that whole lower body system is now being held up by tape correctly, and it prevents the collapse.
Sure. That makes sense.
Which then helps that whole lower body system engage better. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And that actually kind of spurs another thought I had where, so in general, and I'm trying to apply this generally, I mostly wanted to use myself as an example, right? So we can talk.
Yeah. No, I love it.
So, because I'm broken enough to where we could do this forever. So like, if
Aren't we
we're
all?
looking, so if we're looking at taping or wearing a brace or whatever have you, like how long should we expect to use these support structures? And does that weaken other things along the way? Like, are we planning to tape forever, or is this, how does all that tie in?
Yeah, the answer is I don't know.
Cool.
So really, what I have to do is I have to see how quickly we can get that glute online, right? To control that femur head in the socket.
Sure.
And then we got to get you walking better so that it's happening throughout the day. And so you're neurologically activating that gluteal muscle the way it should be, even when you're not running.
Okay.
Right. And so we're going to use the tape as a bridge.
Got it.
And that will help us put things in alignment so that things can turn on the way that they're supposed to. And if they're not turning on, then you're not going to have pain, hopefully, because of it. Right.
Yep.
So once we see that gluteal muscle nice and strong, and once I see the gait pattern has improved, right, then we start weaning you from the tape to see if you can hold it. That's where we find out whether we need to tape you. Maybe you only need to tape for runs that are over, 3 hours.
Sure.
And other runs you're going to be fine up to that point. There may be some point where you just plateau. Your muscles just can't do anymore, or maybe you've got that labral tear, that FAI, or maybe a little bit of arthritic change in that hip. And look, I just need a little bit of support because of these things.
I
right?
get that. Yeah, absolutely.
So you have to be open to those kinds of solutions. We just have to, it's person by person, to be honest.
Yeah, that makes sense. And if it depends, right? The standard answer forever.
Right. Yeah.
And then if we're looking at like movement changes for a lifetime, like I've had clients who go see a doctor, a physical therapist, and they're basically told, well, never move that way again. That like I've one woman, labrum issue, not even specified as a tear, and told just never squat below 90 degrees again. And do, I don't know, permanent universal statements like that are limiting range of motion. Does that seem realistic to you in a lot of instances, or is that a overstatement most of the time, or how does that fit?
Well, here's how I would think about that. If she got that labral tear because she's squatting below 90 degrees, then that's not so off. As long as you have that labral tear, maybe you shouldn't be going below 90 degrees then.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? If the labral tear is happening because of some other issue, it could be irrespective of the depth of her squat. So it really depends on what's the source of that labral tear.
Sure.
And I don't believe the one universal, I have a couple of universal rules that I have. One is that, you've got to fix your walk. If you're not walking well, Well, I'm sorry, you're going to be putting excessive strain on your joints, especially if you consider that you're taking at least 10,000 steps a day, right? And this is one thing that a lot of runners don't realize, is that the walking is setting them up for success running. If you're walking in a dysfunctional way where, like your right glute isn't turning on, then it's just going to take that much longer for that thing to start turning on when you're running. If you're walking in a way that the gluteal muscle is turned on naturally when you're walking, then it's going to be ready to go right there when you start running, instead of allowing you to fall into this hole before pain starts happening.
For sure. And that's probably even more relevant than you realize, because most trail runners are like walking half the time. We call it hiking or some shit, but it's walking.
Right? There we go. Yeah.
Cool.
There we go. Yeah.
Yeah. That makes a ton of sense. So would you say that there tend to be more, the walking is a bigger issue than the running? Like most of the time, if you can fix the walking, the running's going to be better?
Absolutely. I see, I've worked with a lot of runners. I'm not a running coach, but I know if I fix their gait pattern and their lower body issues, I don't care about their running. They're going to be able to run, Yeah. And, I'm not going to dare mess with people's running techniques. I mean, maybe little things here and there where I say, hey, that knee's rotating in an awful lot, or hey, your foot's collapsing an awful lot on that painful side of yours,
Sure.
things like that.
Yeah.
But,
absolutely.
Cool. Yeah.
That makes a ton of sense. Like, that makes a bunch of sense. So I guess that would bring me to, if we're taking 10,000 steps a day or whatever it may be, 5,000 on a light day, 20,000 on a heavy day, like if we're looking at that and we've been doing that for 20, 30, 50 years, how do we consciously make that connection without, just having its space? Because if we are doing this over and over, how do we like remind ourselves to like cause these or create these repatterning or these adjustments or those kind of things?
Yeah, well, I'm sure you've heard of this, Will, where, we have unconscious, lack of control. Then we have conscious awareness of poor control. Then we have conscious awareness of good control. And then we create unconscious good control. So there's a spectrum, right? So the first part of that is being aware that you're not walking correctly and owning up to that. All right. The second thing is to understand what exactly is wrong with your walk and how to fix it. And that's what I show people how to do that in my programs too. Cool. That's one of the pieces of it, because walking is so critical for anything back and anything lower body. It's always coming down to a gait pattern issue. Is some feeder of that problem. And then so then you have to learn how to do it correctly. Well, that happens much more rapidly than you might think. So usually within a week, maybe 2, most people get it. And one of the things that helps them get it is that they have pain when they're not getting it, right?
Sure.
That's a great motivator to learn how to do things well. And they see that when they do it well, they don't have pain. So it's an easy equation in their mind.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. If we have this unconscious pattern that isn't like directly causing pain though, like again, or actively in the moment causing pain, any strategies or techniques that might, help you create that habit or create that check-in process?
Well, first, if it's an unconscious pattern, then you're not aware that it's even a bad pattern, right?
I guess like let's use me as an example. Continue to do that, right? So I'm clearly not walking well, especially on the right side.
Right.
I mean, I'm aware it exists now, but there's a pretty high likelihood that if I go walk for a couple hours, I'm not going to like have that focus for that entire time.
Right.
And if I'm on my feet all day, which I am, I'm going to break that, especially if I'm like talking to clients and moving around and picking things up and all this stuff.
Yeah.
Like, do we have this like ability to check in regularly, or thoughts on like creating those habits so that we, can bring that back to the forefront of the brain?
Sure. The first thing I do to help people change their gait pattern is I tape the backs of their knees. Because the thing
that sounds awful. I love that.
Yeah. The thing that is turning off your gluteals, Will, is the fact that you're locking your right knee when you stand. You might be doing it on your left side too, but I know it's happening on the right side.
I do it. I stand on my left since it's my posting leg.
I mean, not when you stand, I mean when you walk. I'm sorry.
Got it. And I lock it all the time. So I'm sure it's happening on my right when I walk.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what you're going to do is you're going to get a little piece of athletic tape, and you're going to bend your knee about 10 or 20 degrees, and you're going to put a little piece of athletic tape behind your knee, about halfway up your calf to about halfway up your thigh. And then anytime you start locking your knee, that's going to give you feedback into your brain that says, there it is again. So usually I do that. That takes about 3 days for most people to break that habit. And what you'll find is that you have to take smaller steps than normal because your pelvis doesn't know how to open up in the correct way. It's been opening up in an incorrect way.
That makes sense.
So once you start to walk with your knees softer and change your gait, you're going to have to take smaller steps temporarily. Once you get it, you'll be able to take as big a steps as you want to with your knees unlocked, but your brain just doesn't know how to do that just yet. And that 3 days will help your brain figure that out. Once that's happened, then we teach correct walking patterns. But you've already done the hardest work because unlocking the knee, you can't walk correctly if you're locking your knees.
Sure.
Absolutely. And so if you fix that, then you can fix your gait pattern pretty easily.
Yeah, super helpful. So yeah, just these little triggers. I get that. And then if we're looking at, I guess, a couple other unrelated questions to me, it would be nice to hear from PT. One, if you do damage something like a labrum or a tendon or something that is not muscular tissue, is it going to heal on its own? Is this a thing that will come back together? Like how much can we expect an actual repair process from that?
Likely it won't heal on its own. There's two things that go into that. One is, does it get its own vascular supply, right?
Yeah.
If it doesn't, if it's an area of your labrum that isn't getting blood supply, there's nothing that can heal it then.
Right.
Right. Same goes with a meniscus or things like that.
Yep.
So the second thing is, if you haven't changed the thing that caused that tear to happen, then it's not going to heal.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense. Cool. So you have no blood flow and you keep hurting it. Yeah, got it.
Right.
Yeah, that makes sense. Cool.
Yeah. So, but I don't know of, and there's probably studies out there that might show this happens. I don't know if there's a spontaneous healing of labral tears or meniscal tears that occurs without surgical approximation and then a resting period, because those tissues are not like muscle, and like you said, they're not like muscle. So they're not going to heal as rapidly as muscle. They're not going to heal the same way muscle heals.
Yeah.
So they need a little bit more forced rest and approximation to make sure that everything heals and lines up correctly and things like that.
That makes sense. Yeah, they've shown that they don't even pull from the amino acid pool in the same way. Like you actually need to like preload collagen for it to be effective at all. Whereas like you can obviously drink a protein shake or something afterwards for your muscles. So it makes a ton of sense that you'd need to like treat them differently in all of the ways. I get that.
Yeah.
And then one thing that I get questions asked about fairly regularly and don't have a, great answer, warm-ups. What does a warm-up really need to look like? Does it need to be very individualized? I feel like probably should be, but I'd love to hear your opinion. And then like active stretching, static stretching, like how might that fit?
Well, I agree with you. It's individualized. You've got hypermobile people who are runners, and you've got hypomobile people who are runners, right? And there are some people who have very tight calf soleus complexes.
Yep.
And there are people who have loose calf soleus complexes. So it has to be individualized. But really what I found is that your body will tell you what you need. If your first, half mile you're groaning because you're stiff and sore, right? And your feet feel like 2 blocks of concrete, then maybe you should do a little bit of stretching before, because frankly, if that's happening, you're going to have compensations that are occurring that are going to damage you.
Sure. Yeah.
So spend 5 minutes, do some active or dynamic or whatever. But if you're one of those people who can just are loosey goosey and just feel just fine running without warming up, well, then that's obviously working for you. Who am I to say no? And
sure.
for me, like, I'm a flat foot runner.
Mm.
I'm not very, you know, mechanically gifted. So when I run, you know, that goes directly to my hips and knees more.
Got it.
If I was a more of a forefoot runner, like I see all those kind of gazelle-like runners who are nice and fleet of foot and fast and light on their feet, that's not me. They have more joints that they can disperse force through because they're forefoot runners. I have fewer because I'm a flat foot runner.
Yep.
So I need a little bit more warm up because I have more trauma happening to me than those gazelle runners.
I like that. That makes sense. And I guess the other thing that be there is how, if somebody's struggling and doing this, like how might you find a PT that has this kind of systemic view? Because you'll often see some that are only focused on individual muscles or whatever, rather than looking at movement patterns and all of that. And until, I mean, my early 20s, when he got really sick, my dad would always look at me, so I never had to go through this process, right? So like, I'm just kind of curious how you might go about this. Also, things have changed a lot in the last 10 years from an insurance perspective. So how might someone search one out?
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, this is not taught in PT school, because I've trained all of my therapists at my clinic were new grads or a few years out. None of them have been taught any of this systemic, because we're trained as component thinkers to understand a tissue that's injured. And we're trained to think that we're systems thinkers because we can think a joint above or below, but it's really more than that. So my recommendation, the professor who I base most of my biomechanics off of is Dr. Shirley Sahrmann. She's a PhD professor out of Washington University in St. Louis. So if your listeners are looking for someone who thinks from a system standpoint, then you can ask the prospective PT, hey, have you studied Dr. Shirley Sahrmann's work? You know, and if they've never even heard of her, chances are they're not going to be a systems thinker. But if they have heard of her, then and studied her, then there's more of a chance that they'll be more of a systems thinker than the average PT.
Sure, makes sense.
Yeah,
cool. Well, thank you so much for your time, Rick. I really appreciate it. Anything else you definitely want to add before we head out? I'd like you to mention programs and all that other stuff. But what else can we remember to move a little better and all that stuff?
Yeah, a couple things. One is, no one who came to my clinic with any pain from the low back down to the foot didn't learn how to walk better. I don't care how old they were. So you're not too old to learn how to walk better, and your body will thank you for it. And the second thing is, if you've been dealing with chronic or nagging or recurrent injuries, it's not because you're broken. It's because you haven't gotten the right information yet. Because the body has all of these innate processes to help it heal. You can cut your skin and it'll heal. You can break a bone, it'll heal. So if something's not healing, it's because there's some obstacle in the way. Now, it could be a musculoskeletal thing, but it also could be a nutritional, dietary, allergen-based thing. It could be an emotional, traumatic, spiritual kind of trauma thing, contributing to tension patterns in your body that's causing you to hurt. But whatever the cause is, there are solutions out there, because our bodies are naturally designed to be pain-free or relatively pain-free. Now, whether they're designed to be running 150 miles all the time, maybe another question.
Yeah, probably not, but that's what apparently we choose to do sometimes. So,
right. I don't believe mine is, but I applaud those who can do that. So good for them.
Yeah, for real. It's hard. It's really hard.
Yeah, it is.
Hey,
so anyway, anyone who's looking, I've created downloadable home programs to help people solve their pain from head to toe. Those can be found at rickolderman.com. And I've also created an online training program for any health or wellness practitioner who's interested in learning how to look at pain from this perspective, to understand and solve it. You can also find that course there. And if you type in Fixing You, all one word, FIXINGYOU, for any of my programs, you'll get a 20% discount on those.
Thank you, Rick. Really appreciate that.
Sure.
Yeah,
sure.
Kind of Okay. I will definitely include all of that in the show notes. And thank you so much. Hang on
My
one sec.
pleasure, Will.
Anybody listen to this, thank you very much. I appreciate you sticking around, and I will be back soon with another episode. Good day. Thank you for listening to the show. To be clear, I'm not a doctor nor a registered dietitian, and nothing you heard was medical advice. You should always speak with a qualified medical professional before making any changes to your training regimen. If you enjoy the podcast or found it useful, please take a couple seconds to give it a rating or share it with a friend. Every little bit helps. And if you want more of this information, please head to the Trail and Ultra Running Nutrition group on Facebook. You'll be in good company with other like-minded people who like to do hard stuff outside.